Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. In this video, we're going to be adding 5 plants to the new native garden. If you haven't been following along with this project, there's a playlist for the native garden. This is an adjoining lot to our garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina, that the city actually owns, and the city's given us permission to come over here and turn this into a native garden. So if you haven't followed along with it, as you're finding this, make sure you can follow this playlist if you want to. And we're going to be adding a lot of interesting native plants over here. I think we had planted 3 already. We're adding 5 today. This is an interesting little space over here. We are off of a road called Fowler in the neighborhood here, and Fowler was a nursery that was here originally. And I don't know if that's why this got graveled originally, but when I dig down about 2-3 inches, I hit a gravel layer. Once I break through that gravel layer, the plants don't care. The plants don't care about that little bit of gravel that's down there. So it's not hurting them, but it's a little harder to dig. Once I break through that, I hit the red clay that we have everywhere here. So I don't know if this was part of the nursery at one point. They moved from here in this neighborhood in Raleigh out to Garner, and then have since moved down to Clayton, and I bought a lot of stuff from them as a garden center. So this nursery is still in business today. Does a lot of annual color, shrubs as well, but a lot of annual color and perennials that I used to buy from them. So kind of an interesting thing that we'd be gardening here in a space where that nursery originally started. But again, I don't know if that's where this gravel layer came from. We've wood chipped this space, and I'm planting the plants high like I always do in my clay-based soil, but it probably won't appear that they're all that high because there's 6 inches of wood chips. But those wood chips are gonna kind of melt away in time. So keep in mind that I'm feathering the wood chips in without getting it up on the wood, up on the plants at all. As you're watching, the video of planting these 5 plants. So the plants are up above the grade, about this much above the soil grade, okay? And then they're mounded up like this. And then I just feathered the bark, the wood chips back across. So there's no wood chips up on the plant itself, okay? And they're gonna sink down in time as everything starts eating them, and then turns this into, hopefully, an improved soil here over the next few months. Let's jump in and talk about plants, 5 plants, okay? This is river birch that we talked about down at Jason Stevens' place. When we got these plants, Jason made a big donation to this garden right out of the gate. Had other people as well have jumped in and given us a few things as well. So this was a donated river birch, and this is a dwarf river birch. I'll link that video down below this one, but I talked a little more about it than I'm probably going to in this video right here. But it's called Little King. It's a Chicagoland selection, and I think what's the Vitex we have? Summertime Blues. Summertime Blues is a Chicagoland selection. We have a few perennials that are still asleep right now that are Chicagoland selections as well. But these are hardy for most people watching. I think like zones 5 to 9, maybe even 4. Yeah, so 4 to 9. An interesting dwarf river birch. So I think if you see any label on this, it's going to say it gets 8 to 10 feet tall. I think the one down at Jason's, which has been there for a long time, is around 12 feet. The thing, it looks wild. Just this perfect little miniature version of a river birch. Just like any other river birch, it prefers slightly moist conditions, but they will become pretty drought tolerant in time. Biggest mistake probably people make with river birches is just planting one in their lawn. Because every single time they're fairly shallow rooted, and every single time you mow the grass, you're exposing those shallow roots to sunlight. And so having them in a much bigger bed gives them the opportunity to not have their roots sun scalded or drying out, weekend over weekend over weekend every time you mow the grass. So typically what we'll see on river birches in ornamental landscapes is they're planted on a lawn. They flush out in the spring, they grow like crazy, and then about June, they start losing leaves like crazy because they can't figure out how to get water anymore, out in the lawn. And so again, this is a spot, there's not a lot of grade to this property at all, but the house is definitely well up above the space I'm standing in. So as we're irrigating anything over here in this garden, it's definitely gonna come through this area and land in this space. So I think it's gonna stay pretty evenly moist over time. These have exfoliating bark, just like any other river birch. It's one of the draws of these, and this one gets exfoliating bark pretty early on. A lot of times it takes years and years and years before you start to see that papery bark, on these. But anyway, it's already starting to leaf out. It's March 18th, I guess, or 19th, or is it 20th? 20th maybe as we're filming this. Wow, time is flying. And it's starting to leaf out. I think any river birch you get is going to be pretty root bound. They're aggressive rooting plants, and so while I had it out of there, I had two main roots that were definitely circling around. Make sure you're going to cut those or pull them out, or even root wash one of these. If you're planting it dormant like this, I probably could have washed all the soil off and actually straightened the roots out if I wanted to on something like this while it's dormant. Wouldn't do it in a leafed out condition because I think that would maybe damage the tree. But this, I don't want those circling roots just to keep choking one another out over the years. I'll probably end up losing one of the three main stems on it. But there you go. River birch was number one. This is an Alyssium floridanum called Halley's Comet. Reputedly very, very cold hardy, like potentially zone 5 cold hardy, which are not a lot of leafy evergreens for that. I think Dr. Durr said it survived negative 15 degrees somewhere. I don't know where that was. I don't know what conditions that was in or anything like that. I just know I heard that. Typically we would say zones 6 to 9 on most of these Alyssium. These are Gulf Coast natives, and so this native garden is definitely going to be plants from the southeast United States. And so this one would not be native to Wake County where I'm at right now. It would be more on the Gulf Coast. This is a selection. It has maroon flowers. You could keep this anywhere between like 4 and 8 feet in height, and on the slightly narrower side, 3 to 4 feet in width, something like that. In time, deer typically don't eat these, but I'm just past saying deer don't eat things. It's been a wild year, and I think anybody watching this video, I have heard even the things that are on the Rutgers deer resistant list this year that are on the A group that deer just don't eat, people were reporting deer have eaten this year. I think it's just a slightly tougher winter and a big herd, and they'll just eat. At some point they got to eat even things that aren't palatable to them, I guess. These will take a minute to get established. Make sure you keep an eye on your Alyssium. I think this probably makes 7 or 8 Alyssium that we have on this whole garden project. Some Asian species, but mostly our native species. And every single one of them has required a minute to get established. I mean, it meant that they didn't grow really in the first year, and then they kind of weeped a bit, it took a minute to get them to root in, and then they take off, and then they're pretty much fine on their own after that, but not a plant and forget plant necessarily. These are great for part shade conditions, so not a lot of leafy evergreens that can create border plants and screening plants in shady spaces, but this is definitely one that can. Going to take a minute for this to get any size on it. This was another donated item from Jason, so thanks for that. It's about to flower, and it'll have these alien-like maroon flowers on it in March, April, typically for us, obviously later if you were growing this in a more northern area. And then it can come back around and throw a few flowers late summer, early fall as well. But really interesting, if you break the leaves on these, they have a very distinct smell on Alyssium. So highly recommend them for your landscape, for native purposes, and then also just because, again, they tend to really be industrial plants once they get established. This is a Blackhaw Viburnum or Viburnum prunifolium. This one actually is native to Wake County and kind of west of here, and then up north from here. Almost everybody watching can grow this plant. This one's hardy in zone 4 to 9. Gets white flowers, as you would expect on lots and lots of viburnums are spring flowering with white flowers. This one is an important pollinator plant for several butterflies and other pollinators in the spring, and then also an important food source for birds in the fall. You're better off having 2 of these to get more fruit than just one, but they will sell fruit with just one. Like a lot of these native plants, they're going to be suckering. So this is going to try to create a colony in time, and it's going to become a very large plant. I can tree form this up 15, 18 feet if I wanted to, or I can keep it lower as a shrub. A lot of these viburnums don't respond well to going in and hacking them in half. Well, they respond okay to it. They grow back from it, but it will create suckering and also tends to skip a season flowering well, when you prune them hard. So what we're going to do is likely just lift this one up in time and allow it to become maybe a single trunk tree form, or maybe allow a couple suckers to come up on it and maybe make it a 2 or 3 stemmed tree form in time. We've got This is going to get big, and the way we're going to have the path going, this will be a focal point for one of the paths. So there is a method to our madness out here on some where the larger things are going to be planted. There'll be focal points, you know, maybe a bench in front of that river birch over there in the future, something like that. But we do have a plan for how the path is going to meander through here, and that the larger pieces will be focal points here in the garden. Beautiful foliage on this. I think it's super underused native plant to a large area of the eastern United States, and pretty fast growing once it gets going. And I can see it's starting to leaf out already, so kind of excited to see that happen. Again, this is another one. So many of our native shrubs, native trees, that river birch, the Persea you're about to see, even that Alyssium would overall prefer kind of moist conditions. And again, this is the lower part of this garden, so any watering we're doing up here in the vegetable garden or whatever is going to end up here. But they will adapt to our ornamental gardens as well. It's just you got to keep an eye on them early on, make sure you're getting them well established before you walk away and kind of let them manage on their own. This is the Persea palustris that we got from Jason's. And if you go back to that video, and again, I'll link that video down at the bottom, you can see that river birch in its full glory standing next to that Persea. Interesting plant. It's actually endangered. There's a disease that's unfortunately spread by an ambrosia beetle that's causing this plant to decline, and it's the host plant for a couple of butterflies, which is unfortunate. This one is another one. This is a large native evergreen shrub, okay, but it can reach 20 feet and be 10 feet wide if we let it. This selection Jason found along the creek at his place, and I think he's called it Hannah's Creek. If I'm wrong about that, it'll be on the screen. But I think it's Hannah's Creek that he named it for. It's a really tight growth habit on this one. This one's been grown close to other ones, so it's stretching a bit at this point, but it'll be allowed to fill out now. But his is very full, dense growth habit. It's probably 12, 14 feet tall at his place, something like that, and maybe 6 feet wide and really dense foliage. We go back, and I had more details on this one. We've got a Chinese privet growing above it, and this morning I came out here and cut a bunch of the heavier limbs that were directly above it, but the rest of that entire plant has to go. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. It is a very large plant, and it's leaning out and over my neighbor's fence and that kind of thing, so I'm going to have a conversation with him just in the process of removing it, because some of it's going to have to be done from both sides. But it's a massive plant that's completely colonized over here. This is the wettest spot in this garden, and so these will grow in sandy maritime forests, in pines where it is seasonally wet and very dry at times of the year as well, and then also fairly wet conditions as well. But this will be the wettest part of this space, so this one's as much of an experiment and as anything. It's a plant that I've ID'd out in the out botanizing in the eastern part of the state in the past. This is a beautiful selection that he made in a woodland near his house in Johnston County, which is 20 or 30 minutes from where we are right now. So hopefully it does well here. We'll see over the next few years, right? And that's going to be part of this. We're going to be I'm trying some interesting native plants and not just the most common things that we can get our hands on, hoping that we can introduce some folks to some other interesting plants that are, native to the Southeast. Last but not least is this dwarf loblolly pine. This one has always been on my list of plants that I'd like to have. There's several of them planted in front of the horticulture school at NC State right up the street, and several of them over at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum as well. This was a witch's broom off loblolly pine in Virginia, which means sometimes especially on conifers, you'll get weird growth occasionally coming out, from the side of it. And sometimes, unfortunately, on like our dwarf conifers in our gardens, it can be the original plant that we want to kind of cut out. But a lot of the dwarf conifers we had were brooms. They were just interesting, strange growth on a conifer. Somebody took the cuttings and then produced them as as slower growing conifers. We call them dwarves. They just typically are slow growing or mutant in some way. This was a witch's broom on a pine that they were actually looking for faster growing loblolly pines, because you can imagine the Forestry Service is constantly, pine is a big business in the Southeast. In fact, Steph and I rode through from Augusta, Georgia down to near Tallahassee in Florida a few weeks ago. Went to, just a pine farm, through the entire southern part of Georgia there. So it's important industry. This one, again, was gathered hoping that it would be, a faster growing one, and it is the absolute opposite. It is a dwarf loblolly pine. I think the tallest one probably on campus is maybe 25 feet tall at this point, but it has been there a long time, probably since the 70s. Maybe, in fact, we did a video a few weeks ago where we showed where Steph had tagged a lot of the plants that were in front of the Hort building on NC State, and that was one of the trees that we showed in that video. And again, those are probably 20 to 25 feet tall. I would expect, this is going to be 10 feet tall in 15 years. So interesting. It keeps its bottom limbs, where your other pines will kind of lift up as it goes. So you probably need to, we'll probably take lower limbs off as it goes. This was not an inexpensive tree. It's very hard to propagate. So this one's not one that you're probably going to readily find necessarily. The other things Jason does grow, the other 4 items were from Jason, and they're items that he does grow. He does the pine knot farm sale every year, and you may be able to get up with him in other ways to find some, he does a lot of interesting things, as you can see. Again, typically, this is not an inexpensive plant. They're hard to propagate, but it's one that I've been on my list for a long time. It's a beautiful, beautiful pine, and it's kind of a miniature of our native loblolly pine. So there you go. There's the 5 plants that we're adding. I think that makes 8 total plants out here. Most of the things we've put in here so far get pretty big, even if it happens a little slowly. They get pretty big. We're going to probably start scaling down the size of things. We're putting in kind of the bones initially, the larger growing things, the things that will be focal points out here, and then we'll start coming down with lower shrubs and perennials. We'll probably, I don't know how many perennial things, native perennials, we'll be putting out here this year. I think this bark's going to take a minute to break down enough for that. So we're probably going to go trees or large shrubs, then smaller shrubs, and then maybe it'll be even next year before we start putting any native perennials in here. But a lot of the shrubs will be in here. So if you're interested in coming to the open garden on June 20th and 21st, there will be a lot of things by then planted out here, and hopefully it'll be looking pretty good by that point. So thank you guys so much for watching.